Welcome back to my podcast. We're on episode 91. Last time I told you about my first long term relationship and the coming apart of it. Today I'll tell you about my job search after my master's. I considered myself close to both my sisters at this time. We confided in each other. Of course, we couldn't confide in our parents, but we had each other. One day, Ruby excitedly told me about her bus ride home. She was in the Kalina bus on her way home from her pharma college. There were no seats available and she was standing. Nothing unusual about that. Someone stood up, so a seat became available. She managed to grab the seat just as a guy was also trying to sit. Living in Bombay, you learn the fine art of grabbing a seat before someone else does. She looked up at this guy and he was super cute. He was holding a lot of books that he was finding difficult to manage. It was obvious he was having difficulty managing all the things that he was holding while standing in the bus that constantly lurched, normal on Indian roads, and flung people around. Ruby kindly offered to hold some of his books. FYI, we did this often on public transport, either offering a seat to older or unwell people or at least offering to hold some of the heavy things that they had. So it was not unusual. Soon, these two were coming across each other on the bus very often, possibly because both made it a point to take the same bus. The way my mind worked at the time, I simply did not comprehend how much Ruby liked this guy. Every night when we lay in our shared pull-out bed, all Ruby could talk about was Karan, this guy. She would tell me every detail about their interaction of that day. Ruby would even call him up constantly. One day, Mom asked me if Ruby liked this guy. "Oh, Mom, no," I said. "They're just friends." Yup, I was that clueless. Whenever Mom asked Ruby if they should start looking for a groom for her, she would say, "Not until I've completed my master's." Already, Ruby was a couple of years behind her peers thanks to Udyachal school not accepting her in the appropriate grade when she had joined. Now Ruby was 25 or 26 when her batchmates were 22. And since Mom refused to find me a husband or get me married until Ruby was married, I just had to wait. Ruby would go to a public phone or PCO to call up her friend Karan regularly. I can't remember why she didn't use the home phone, but she would ask me to go along and I would. I soon figured out a curious dynamic between the two of them. Karan would often misunderstand or misinterpret something that Ruby did or said. Then he would give her the silent treatment, presumably to punish her. And when he felt he had done this for enough number of days, like she would call him up and try to talk and she would just hear silence on the other end. So he was conveying that he was pissed. So when he felt he'd done this for enough number of days, when he'd punished her for enough number of days, then he would start talking to her and explain what had actually hurt him. And then she would clarify what she had meant and what the actual misunderstanding was. It was very strange to me to see how he would just stay silent on the other end of the phone while Ruby would whimper and sob and plead. This Ruby was so different from the assertive, scary Ruby that she otherwise was. Why was she a blubbering mess in front of this guy? I remember thinking that if someone tried this stunt with me, I'd just disconnect the phone and be done with them. Meanwhile, Dad enrolled Ruby and I into an MBA prep class 1 month before the MBA entrance exams. This was out of the blue for me. I had difficulty with numerical and pattern prediction sections. So I had difficulty with 2 of the sections where I would probably score almost next to nil. When the results were out, Ruby scored better than me, though both our scores were quite good. We did not make the cut for the 10 MBA colleges in Mumbai. Anyway, it had been a shot in the dark, but Ruby was very close to making it, like 3 or 4 points. Perhaps if we had started preparing a little earlier, or if I had just practiced those 2 areas more. Then, after the admissions were done and we did not get through, I met a guy who had scored lower than me but had gotten through. How did he get through the topmost management institute? He laughed and said that they had bribed them. I was shocked. Ruby should have gotten through at least, Like, if this guy got through, Ruby was definitely way more deserving than him. Dad started wondering if he should have bribed someone at the college. When it was time for campus placements towards the end of my MA course, we had one of the top companies of the country come to our department. I had high expectations and had dressed in my smart formal blue outfit. As expected, I made it through the written test round. Swati seemed surprised. She had not made it and said it was lucky that I was wearing that particular dress on that day. I told her I had worn it because I expected to pass the test and go into the GD or group discussion round. I felt I had a good chance of making it to the interview round and even getting an offer. However, I felt my heart sink when I saw the GD topic. There were like 7 of us sitting around a table, and the only thing I can remember was that the topic was about the economic impact of something or the other. I was completely blank about economics and did not know what I could say. Plus, when the GD started, the group all started aggressively speaking over each other to get their say. I did not know anything about this topic and anxiously racked my brain for something to say. It was time up and I hadn't spoken a word. If I had spoken, I know they would have been impressed, but what to say about economics? Dejected, I left. Only one girl from our batch had made it through, and I knew I could have been a good or even valuable employee to them. I was sincere, eager to learn, even eager to please, and I knew all the things that a person at this position would have to perform. But I guess I did not convey that in the selection process. I wondered how many others out there are like me, who would really fit the role well, but just did not interview well. Later, I managed to mess up a sure shot offer. A visiting lecturer who worked at L&T had told us about a few vacancies. And I had gotten through the interview for a Fortune 500 company for an entry-level job in the HR division. I was selected. It was a done deal. The only thing left was for me to meet the CEO. I missed the bus for the appointed time for the CEO interview and had to wait for the next bus that came only after 20 minutes. By the time I reached, the CEO had left for the day, and the HR guys just sat with me awkwardly asking me some questions since I had commuted all the way, instead of understanding that I had messed up by getting late. I got angry and thought that these people had wasted my time. I wrote an angry letter to the CEO complaining about the two HR guys and how they had called me all the way to the campus a second time and I hadn't gotten to meet him, the CEO. The letter reached the CEO and he immediately called me up. He asked me if what I had written was true, but he was constantly laughing. I was confused. I indignantly complained about his HR managers and he just laughed some more. I guess he'd never met someone who had behaved like this. Yet again, I had done something without thinking it through and had shot myself in the foot. After that, I didn't know what to do. I never heard from them again. The vacancy was still open and a classmate asked me if she could go ahead and apply. She got the job. She also found a husband there. As for me, I was feeling pretty lost. The same visiting lecturer also told us about an entry-level opportunity at a firm called Arthur Anderson. This was in South Bombay, in the Fort area. I had a tailored pantsuit and wore it for the interview. At that time, Gagan had also accompanied me and waited outside the office building. I walked in and was interviewed by a guy called Darius Gandhi. I was suitably impressed and intimidated by this important-looking guy. I distinctly remember, while he was interviewing me, he scratched his head and then stared at whatever had come off on his finger so confidently. He wasn't cringing, he wasn't looking awkward, he wasn't looking embarrassed. I just thought how self-conscious I would have been in that situation and wouldn't even have dared to scratch an itch in an office setting. Darius Gandhi, on his part, seemed to be impressed by my outfit and even my answers. And then I messed it up at the last possible second, when it was a given that he was going to make an offer. He asked if I would be comfortable making the long commute every day. That was just a closing question. Instead of saying yes, since I had been making the Sophia College commute every day, this would definitely be easier and doable. I said something that I thought was smart. I'm sure the company will give me housing nearby, I said. Oh no. I had been operating on the paradigm of Godrej giving accommodation to all their employees. That pause derives from actually making the offer, and he sent me a letter of regret later. I still cringe when I think about it. I had it, and then I didn't. Another sure shot opportunity lost by my stupidity. At least I was consistent at something. I then started scanning the newspapers and applied for any position that remotely fit my qualifications. I went to the fort side of the city and interviewed with a Sardar Papa guy who ran a business wherein he imported some business magazines and distributed them in the city. During the interview, I realized that his eyes were fixated on my chest. I wondered why his eyes wouldn't budge, so I looked down and then I noticed, to my horror, that my nips were standing at attention. That was the day I learned that nips respond to the air conditioner and become erect when it is cold. I had not been in air conditioned settings much and was now in this weird situation with the old lech openly ogling my nips. The rest of the interview was a blur. Eventually, it was a waste of time because he was offering too little an amount, just 2,500. Dad forbade me to accept such a low offer. Most office boys and peons made more than that. Meanwhile, our cousin Sukh had brought a rishta for Ruby. Problem is, all the people of our community that Sukh was acquainted with were similar to her and Swarn. They were people who were Jawans in the Navy. They had a certain mentality and view of life that was quite different from ours. From the beginning, Dad had started moving in different circles, and our exposure, our thinking had evolved accordingly. We could not relate to these people and felt pretty out of place with them. A disconnect, wherein we couldn't relate to their way of life or their beliefs. Socializing with them felt uncomfortable, like the kind where you can't wait to leave because you can't be your authentic self around these people. Of course, we were always respectful and polite with everyone. That is how Mom had brought us up. But I remember feeling distinctly uncomfortable around them and their views and their thinking. I found their ways primitive and regressive, I'm sorry, low-key suffocating. While we no longer fit in with our relatives and their social circles, we were living around and socializing with people who were not from our community. From a marriage perspective, this meant that we were not able to find a suitable match. Neither were we wealthy, nor were Ruby and I super beautiful. The two criteria that make matches desirable for the ladke wale, the boys' side. To make it worse for us, we seemed smart and urban, which again dissuaded the ladke wale. We were aware that some Jat Sikhs were doing pretty well for themselves. They were cultured, evolved, quite like us, such as some army officers or corporate managerial level employees. But either we were not acquainted with them or they were not interested in us. They set their sights higher. They knew they would do better financially with someone else, not us. So those who were interested in us, we were not interested in them. And those who we were interested in didn't care about us or didn't know us. Ruby got engaged to this guy who had been a neighbor of Sukh's because Sukh had brought the rishta. But with some interactions, we could see that they were very different from us. And Ruby started feeling very uncomfortable around the guy. We eventually made the difficult decision to break off the engagement. Of course, Sukh was not happy. Now we were back to square one. We searched and searched, no longer limiting ourselves just to our Jat Sikh community. We found a rishta from a Punjabi sweet vendor family. They had a sweet shop. The guy was very obese and also had a bunch of sisters. We were considering the rishta, but then Mom started worrying about her super thin daughter. Not only was she thinking about how Ruby would be crushed under this guy, she also worried about how she would cope if all the 7 sisters descended on her together. So, visualizing all these future scenarios, Mom started worrying, and so she declined this rishta. Another time we were talking to the ladke wale and they said that they were not interested in Ruby but would be interested in me, for their son. Mom promptly declined, saying पहले बड़ी वाली की शादी करेंगे. She did not ask me or discuss with me at all. She just took the decision on my behalf. Meanwhile, Molly had a peculiar behavior whenever we were expecting someone to come by and see Ruby. जब लड़के वाले लड़की देखने आते थे. Mom had once mentioned or Molly had once seen in a movie that the ladke wale came to see one sister but then saw the more beautiful sister and wanted her in their family. As the self-appointed most beautiful sister, Molly would say, "Oh, I need to make myself scarce in case the ladke wale see me." So basically, Molly believed that she was so beautiful that the ladke wale would see her and forget about Ruby. So she was on her own ego trip. Nothing was working out on the Rishta front, and Mom and Dad failed to find an arranged match for Ruby. Meanwhile, Karan and Ruby had remained friends. Mom asked again if they were together. I guess desperate times call for desperate measures. I wonder if Mom had just secretly hoped that we would find our own husbands. But if that were the case, both the parents had actively been scaring away any guys and had also maintained an iron grip on our social lives, never letting us go out and actually meet any potential suitors. It would have been very easy to find lots of potential suitors if we had not come to Bombay and studied at Godrej School, ironically. The city and education we received combined made us unsuitable for most of the matches that our parents had access to. That's like when you get rejected for a job because you're overqualified for it. Now our parents felt they couldn't just get us married to the typical Jat, the less educated and more crude petrol pump owners and truck owners. They felt we wouldn't fit in with those families. We had become smart, sensitive, thinking girls, but neither our looks nor our financials attracted the kind of people that our parents thought we deserved. Plus, we had these idealistic no dowry ideals that drove away everyone else very effectively. So now our parents were in a quandary. We were too good for the people within our reach, but not good enough for the ones they thought we deserved. They wouldn't give us time of the day. Or we simply didn't know how to find and reach those who were suitable for us. That was the time before marriage apps and dating apps, and social media, and even the internet, maybe. Just like the job situation, where I did not interview well but would be an ideal employee. Here too, I knew that I had the potential to be a wonderful ideal bahu who could keep her in laws pleased. I knew what I had to offer and what I brought to the table as a wife and bride. I would be so good as a wife and bride. I would be the kind of bahu that the Indian in laws longed for. I would be sweet, down to earth. I would do seva for them, the works. I would put them before myself. I would think of everyone else before I would think of myself because that's how I'd been brought up. Super low self esteem, super low self confidence. But this was not obvious when people came for the rishta. Or maybe we just couldn't reach the right people. At any rate, we were talking about Ruby's situation. I got carried away, sorry. Now that mom had failed to find a suitable groom for Ruby, and dad was not contributing much, maybe because he had no idea how to, maybe because mom had always ruled us, now mom was open to the idea of getting Ruby married to Karan. We all liked him. But they were not together in that sense. I guess they both liked each other, but hadn't really expressed it. One day, when Karan had called up at our place, Molly had received the call and she told him that if he liked Ruby, he should just go ahead and say so. And that started off Ruby and Karan's relationship. They were soon engaged. Yay! After that, we started making preparations for the wedding. But I guess the stress of not finding a job and the breakup with Gagan and the wedding preparations had weakened my immune system. I got typhoid. I felt better within a week and went for another job interview. I didn't get the job, but I got a relapse of the typhoid. A bad one. I was bedridden for a month. I lamented not being able to contribute in the wedding preparations. Irrespective of how mom treated us from time to time, she could be equally supportive and loving also. She made sure to look after me well, and I slept in her bed every night. Eventually, I got better and Ruby got married. I remember how sad I felt that first night without Ruby at home. She used to make me laugh every day. As more and more time passed, I didn't have any job offers. I started getting desperate. Every morning, I sat with the classifieds and circled jobs, typing out cover letters and mailing my CVs to the various firms. I would go for interviews and follow up, and it would lead nowhere. One day, I got a call from that Bapa Sardar's office again. It had been a few months since the interview, and I thought they would give me a better offer this time. I travelled all the way to Fort in South Bombay only to be arrogantly told that if I had accepted the offer earlier, I'd have already earned X amount by now. The offer was the same and I declined. Waste of time. One day I went to Dadar to interview with a headhunting firm. Anil, the HR guy, said there was a vacancy in their Kolaba office where the finance and banking section was. My heart sank when I heard finance and banking, and also Colaba. That was the southernmost tip of Bombay, the farthest commute. I wanted to ask Anil if they had any opportunities in his own department, if he needed an assistant, or even if their HR recruitment section had any vacancies. But I was too intimidated to ask, thinking I had to just say the right things, make the right sounds, just in case I messed up this offer too. It felt wrong in my heart, but I accepted the offer simply out of desperation to have a job in hand. And I started working for this headhunting firm and commuting to Colaba. Next time, I'll tell you about my experience working with this recruitment firm. Till then, stay happy, stay healthy. Bye for now.